Russian state television have issued a brazen warning that Moscow could wipe out Britain with a nuclear tsunami in retaliation for supporting Ukraine, declaring there would be no survivors.
В ходе комбинированной ракетной атаки системами Storm Shadow производства.
January 2026 draws to a dark close. 3 consecutive emergency Russian intelligence briefings. Only one conclusion repeated behind closed doors. The United Kingdom is enemy number 1. Not the United States, not NATO as a whole, Britain. You heard that correctly, Britain. Russia faces over 5,400 nuclear warheads aimed at it worldwide. Yet Kremlin officials privately fixate on a country with 225 warheads, a shrinking army, and no global empire left to speak of. So why does Russian state television mention Britain more often than America? Why do leaked intelligence assessments name London, not Washington, as the primary threat? Is size the only measure of power? It's about who can break your plans quietly. That is the real danger. Like, subscribe, and stay with us, because this story exposes what Putin cannot admit publicly.
If fear were decided by size, Russia would not be looking at Britain. The reality on the ground suggests otherwise. The threat picture is brutally clear. The United States fields over 5,200 operational nuclear warheads, backed by 750 overseas military installations, a $850 billion annual defense budget, and permanent power projection across every ocean on Earth. The United Kingdom, by contrast, maintains roughly 225 nuclear warheads, fewer than 150 overseas facilities, and a defense budget hovering around $75 billion, less than 1/10 of America's. Measured purely by destructive capacity, this level of disparity defies logic. Russia's own arsenal stands at approximately 5,400 nuclear warheads, with delivery systems spanning intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine-launched platforms, and strategic bombers. In any direct confrontation, Moscow's planners model a conflict against the United States across 3 simultaneous theaters, involving up to 2,000 strategic targets, hundreds of satellites, and multi-domain escalation within hours. Against Britain alone, none of those scenarios apply. The UK operates 4 Vanguard-class submarines, only 1 or 2 at sea at any given time, carrying a fraction of the missile load Russia prepares for when wargaming the United States. Britain has no global missile shield, no continental landmass, no depth. From a purely kinetic standpoint, it should be the least intimidating nuclear power Russia faces. Yet internal Russian assessments do not rank threats by raw firepower. They rank them by disruption potential. And here the numbers back that up. Britain does not dominate by mass. It is dominated by precision interference. British intelligence services maintain active or historical coverage in more than 60 countries, with overlapping human, signals, and financial intelligence nodes across Europe, the Middle East, and Eurasia. Russian counterintelligence estimates leaked in recent years suggest that nearly 40% of compromised Russian overseas operations since 2014 trace back to UK-linked exposure, either directly or through allied channels London influenced. While the United States focuses on global deterrence, Britain concentrates on network erosion. Every disrupted financial conduit, every exposed intelligence asset, every quietly severed relationship inside Europe compounds pressure without firing a shot. And Moscow tracks this mathematically. Between 2016 and 2024, Russia lost an estimated 300 to 400 intelligence officers and facilitators across Europe through expulsions, asset freezes, and diplomatic closures, a disproportionate number following UK-led actions or investigations. Rebuilding a single deep cover intelligence network can take 10 to 15 years. Losing several in parallel is not a setback. It is systemic damage. This is the core contradiction Russian planners face. The United States threatens Russia's existence in a war. Britain threatens Russia's control in peacetime. And control is what keeps regimes alive. From Moscow's perspective, a superpower you can predict is safer than a smaller state that repeatedly forces you to react, recalibrate, and bleed influence without escalation. America is loud. Britain is surgical. One dominates headlines. The other rewrites balance sheets, alliances, and operational maps quietly. The numbers do not lie. They just don't measure fear the way television does. And that is where Russia's real anxiety begins. If Washington is a hammer, London is a scalpel. That difference matters more than Kremlin propaganda ever admits. The United States threatens Russia with visible power. Aircraft carriers, missile ranges, troop deployments measured in divisions. Britain threatens Russia with something far more destabilizing: deniability, precision, and institutional memory. Moscow does not fear what it can see. It fears what it cannot trace. Start with intelligence. By conservative estimates drawn from European counterintelligence leaks, British intelligence networks operate in over 70 countries with overlapping civilian, diplomatic, financial, and cyber layers. Unlike American intelligence, which often relies on scale, British operations prioritize continuity. Files don't reset with elections. Officers don't rotate every 2 years. Networks don't disappear when headlines move on. This terrifies Moscow. Putin's inner circle understands something else as well. Britain does not need regime change. It does not need to overthrow Putin. It only needs to ensure that nothing he builds lasts. Every operation compromised, every alliance questioned, every victory incomplete. That is how systems rot. This is why British restraint terrifies the Kremlin more than American firepower. Because restraint implies confidence, and confidence implies patience. Putin's system survives on urgency, on fear, on forcing decisions fast before resistance can organize. Britain slows the clock. Britain stretches consequences across years. Britain makes today's crimes tomorrow's evidence. And that is the final insult. A former empire, written off as declining, still shaping outcomes without firing a shot. Still teaching Moscow that power is not just about force. It is about endurance. Putin can threaten London with nuclear fantasies on television. But behind closed doors, he knows the truth. Britain does not need to defeat him. It only needs to outlast him. And that is the one battle he is not built to win. What makes this story so revealing is not Britain's power, it's Russia's insecurity. A nuclear superpower with 5,400 warheads, the largest land army on Earth, and decades of imperial bravado is privately obsessed with a damp island it once mocked as irrelevant. Not because Britain is stronger, but because Britain is smarter, faster, and far more disciplined. That is the humiliation Moscow cannot process. The Kremlin understands brute force. It understands fear. What it does not understand is a country that quietly dismantles its plans without parades, without threats, without chest-thumping speeches. Britain does not roar. It documents, coordinates, exposes, and isolates, and then lets others follow. Putin's tragedy is that he built a system designed to intimidate cowards. When it met resistance that did not blink, did not flatter, and did not hesitate, the system began to look ridiculous. So Russia rants. State television screams about London. Propagandists fantasize about nuking a city they cannot outthink. And behind closed doors, intelligence briefings circle the same conclusion again and again. Not America, not NATO, Britain, a country that refuses to be bullied and refuses to play Russia's game. That is why this fear is so naked, and that is why it's so pathetic. Because when a regime armed with thousands of nuclear weapons feels threatened by principle, persistence, and preparation, it is already losing a war it cannot fight. And the most dangerous enemy in the end is not the loud one. It's the one that never needed to shout. Between 2014 and 2024, Russian intelligence quietly lost dozens of long-running European assets, many of them compromised not by Washington, but by British-led coordination inside Five Eyes and NATO intelligence fusion cells. These were not flashy arrests, they were silent collapses. Safe houses burned, funding chains froze, communication trees died. From Moscow's perspective, this felt less like confrontation and more like asphyxiation. Then there is financial warfare. Roughly 80 to 100 billion pounds in Russian-linked assets have moved through or been parked in British-connected financial jurisdictions over the past 2 decades. London is not just a city, it is a choke point. Legal expertise, compliance architecture, court systems that freeze money without tanks crossing borders. Every oligarch understands this. Every Kremlin planner understands that when Britain acts, money does not flee, it disappears. Lawsuits stretch for years. Assets become radioactive. Trust evaporates. That kind of pressure cannot be bombed away. And then there is narrative control. Russian state media tracks mentions obsessively. Internal monitoring documents leaked in late 2024 showed that British political figures, intelligence agencies, and media outlets were referenced more frequently in internal Kremlin briefings than any American institution except the Pentagon. Why? Because Britain punches above weight in shaping what allies believe. When London speaks, Europe listens. When London moves, others follow. Not because Britain orders them to, but because it frames the threat first. This is the humiliation Moscow cannot tolerate. A former empire, reduced in size, still setting the tempo, still calling bluffs, still refusing to blink. And here is the quietest fear of all. Britain does not need to defeat Russia militarily. It only needs to prevent Russia from winning. Delay, disrupt, expose, undermine. That strategy stretches wars, drains legitimacy, and fractures alliances from the inside. Empires don't collapse from invasion. They collapse from exhaustion. And in Kremlin rooms where doors stay locked and voices drop low, that is why Britain is not mocked. It is watched closely. This is no longer about missiles, budgets, or battalions. This is about humiliation. Vladimir Putin does not fear Britain as a state. He fears Britain as a mirror, one that reflects everything his system pretends not to be. Putin came of age in a world where power meant obedience. Hierarchies were clear. Fear traveled downward. Loyalty was enforced. In that worldview, the United States makes sense. America is loud, predictable, transactional. You threaten, you negotiate, you trade escalation for concessions. Britain does none of that. Britain does not posture. It documents. It does not shout. It waits. It does not seek applause. It collects leverage. That drives Putin insane. Look at the pattern. Whenever Russia lashes out rhetorically at Britain, the language shifts. It becomes emotional, personal, obsessive, not strategic. Russian television does not describe Britain as a rival. It describes it as treacherous, scheming, and poisonous. Words of betrayal, not war. This is not a coincidence. From Litvinenko to Skripal, from court rulings to public inquiries, Britain did something the Kremlin never expected. It named names, slowly, legally, and permanently. No airstrikes, no ultimatums, just findings that could not be erased, reports that still circulate, conclusions that never expire. For a regime built on controlled memory, this is lethal. Putin understands brute force. He understands sanctions. He even understands battlefield losses. What he does not understand, and cannot control, is a system that weaponizes truth over time. Every British inquiry is a wound that does not heal. Every court judgment is a scar that cannot be spun away. And worst of all, Britain does not act alone. Time after time, London moves first, and others follow. Diplomats expelled, intelligence networks frozen, sanctions coordinated. Moscow sees the pattern clearly. Britain is not the strongest actor, but it is often the trigger. That makes it dangerous.